Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the March meetup of the Triangle SQL Server Users Group main meeting. The announcement tonight is that we no longer have a SQL Saturday. That will probably take place again next year, but for this year it has been canceled. Also, all meetings will be remote only through April. We'll look at May and see what things look like by then. Those were my two announcements for tonight, so I'd like to hand it off at this point to Tom Norman, who's going to talk to us about Azure DevOps.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome this evening. We're going to be talking definitely about Azure DevOps and more along the line of branching and merging. So we'll be talking about that. So the title tonight is Consistent Deployments when you have a team development situation. Most of you know me. I am the Passive Virtualization Group leader. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was named the 2018 Technology Employee of the Year at my company. I am a Microsoft Certified Professional. Just means I passed a test one day, and then I've spoken a lot more SQL Saturdays than what shows on that particular slide. All right, so tonight, instead of agenda, we're going to have a situation. And that is that we have database software and data change requests that are ever flowing for the database. If you don't have that in your environment, please let me know. I need to come to work for you because I've got more than my share. Each enhancement and hotfix and data request change comes at the developer, from several different avenues. And they have different priorities, different goals. We need a hot fix. We need that in right now. This is broken, whatever the case may be. Or it could very well be that you're just in a supply chain or a code chain that basically, okay, we're going to release version 3.0 on April the 15th. And you're just kind of building your code up till you get to that release with the different feature requests that is coming from product or someone within the business that's kind of guiding what's going to go into the software. So the very first thing that, if you've seen any of my sessions on the DevOps type of area, is that we need source control. Okay, and if you're not in source control, please get your stuff in there. Source control is your golden copy, not production. Don't rely on production to be there, because what if you lost that server? The server went down, the server's gone, and you no longer have it. The disk goes bad, whatever the case may be, and you lose it. And you don't have a good backup of it. So another reason source control is actually your golden copy is, how many of us have coded a store procedure review or whatever the case may be, and we'll start working on it, and it's absolutely perfect the first time? Have you ever wanted to actually you spent a day and you're like going, what was I thinking? I just want to throw that piece of code away and start over. Source control allows you to do this, because even if you've checked it in, you can still go to history on the file and find out who changed it last and when, and go get that copy and start working from that copy again. So from the backup copy, or if you need to roll it back, it's a great way to roll back code that if you have an issue and stuff. So definitely, it is your golden copy. It is what you need to look at. Now, we're going to be starting talking about my working environment, so you kind of understand where we are, what's going on, because it's important to know that when you are branching and merging and working through Azure DevOps, basically, how is all this flowing through the different environments that you may be dealing with? Because if you're like most development shops, you're going to at least have, the developers are going to have something, maybe a shared copy. Don't recommend it. You would then have QA systems and probably multiples of them. And you would also have UAT systems, multiples of them. And you very well may have, depending upon whether you have a multi-tenant database or you have a database per client, you'll have maybe one or more production servers. We then also have in our environment, we have an obfuscation or a scrub server. So this allows us to basically, by our choice as a company, we basically pull the databases out of production. We send them to this obfuscation server, and at a bare minimum, we're going to go scrub out the emails. We're going to go obfuscate the emails, because when we send that database into a UAT or QA environment, or even possibly a development environment, we don't want to be spamming our customers with uh, emails from a system that is not production. Now, we also use, and have been using now probably for a couple of years, we use Git as our source control. You can use TFS or whatever you want to use, but that is the one that with Azure DevOps, that is one of your choices. And of course, if you're not aware, Microsoft bought it probably a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. I'm not real good on timing, but they did buy it. And it's probably the most widely used source control out there today. So we will be talking specifically about Git. So just so you're aware. We then use, I call it here VSTS, but it's now called Azure DevOps. And that's what we use for our project and bug tracking, and also our enhancement software product enhancement system. And then you also very well might have something like Zendesk or something like that that actually tracks issues for you, and also possibly a help desk system. So depending upon your environment, you could have one or multiples of these. So for our particular use, we actually have, like I said, test data. And the test data that we're using is a full copy of the database. It is local for the developer. The developer can then, if they screw up their environment, the only person they've messed up is themselves. And a lot of times, even in my environments, my developers, basically, I do have running on a daily basis. In the middle of the night, when they're not on the machine, we back up the databases. I've had a couple requests from developers. Can I get a new copy of the database, or did you back up what I did yesterday? And the answer is yes, I did. And we can then restore what they did, so they can always get back to what yesterday was. Not any further, because I don't keep multiple copies. I'll override them, but they can at least get back to what yesterday was. As we said, that data is obfuscated. So in their particular case, because we happen to have PI and HIPAA data on our machines, we go and obfuscate all of that data, so that basically Kevin is no longer Kevin. Kevin is John Brown, or whoever it may be. You might be looking at changing your reference data, or having, but most of the time the reference data just stays in place. And then we are running multiple products. We're running SSIS, SSRS. We no longer run SSAS, but we used to. So you could have various different avenues there. Now, production changes, right? Production can change via a hotfix. You might have an index, you might have a stored procedure, you might have a view, you might have something like that. Like, we just recently released a major release of our software into production, and I had to create a brand new schema. And that brand new schema is nothing but tools. And most of them are just, some of them are to fix data that's bad, and some of them are to actually just a view to basically give me a quick way to say, what does this data look like for this customer, to see if it's right or wrong, and if we need to fix it. But hotfix changes could very well be, if you don't do a good job of releasing the code, you very well may have a hotfix, and that hotfix change could very well be a index change. Never would I recommend you go out there and change indexes on a production system without first testing it. Uh, you very well could, you're hoping to make the performance better, but you could make it worse. So always test your hot fixes. So any database code that you're changing, whether it being security or jobs or whatever, you probably want to turn around and actually change it. Now, with that, you could have production drift. And what do I mean by production drift? If you're not real disciplined, you could turn around and say, I'll just go make this change in production. And then it never makes it back into source control. This is going to be a problem because if you don't get that code back into source control and you have a release 3 months from now that's changing that exact code that you just put into production today, you would get overwritten. So you need to watch out for production drift. Basically, I slap everybody's hands that if anybody changes stuff, including me, in production without going into source control first. So let's look at some terminology. So DevOps has two ways of deployment. There's actually a state-based deployment, which is a lot of the Redgate, how Redgate stuff works with comparison tools and schema compares and stuff like that. You know, we don't do a schema compare. We do more of a migration-based development, which is just script deployment. And you're like, oh my gosh, you don't compare what's already there? Well, if I know and I understand that my golden copy is in production and I start from that standpoint, then when I make a script change to that stored procedure and I put it through to prod, then I know I've got code base if I'm using my golden copy, which is production, not, or not product, I'm sorry, source control, not production. Okay, so it's important to always start with source control and then you go through. Now, I did have recently my coworker, we got really, really busy and we had branches all over the place running, you know, probably up to 15, 20 branches at a time running, which was absolutely crazy. And, but it all worked. And the thing of it is he made a change and didn't check it in. And then when I went to deploy something, I overrode him. And he was like going, oh no. And I'm like going, you know, so he had to go basically redo the code and get it into source control like he should have had it in the first place. So it's very important that you are very disciplined as the DBA, since you're the one that can mainly change code within production. Hopefully you're the only one besides having the Azure DevOps pipeline change code for you in production. You should be the only ones to be able to do that code change. So let's look at some Azure DevOps process technology. And the first one's a bug, of course. And if you've ever written code, you know, you hope to write it bug-free, but a bug could very well be that the requirements did not fully spell out what you thought it should be. So a lot of times a bug is normally incorrect communication with whoever's telling you to code a specific item. So it's like it says here, it's a divergence between required and actual behavior. So that's one item that we can have when we're dealing with Azure DevOps and working with code, is that we have a bug. Now, the question on that bug is, does it have to go today? Is there a workaround? Or can it go in the next release or even future releases? It's basically, when does the business want to go in and prioritize that bug to be released? Now, an epic is basically kind of the high level, and most of this is talking about your service level, software level development cycle. An epic is just helps you to basically say, here's all the things that we want to accomplish okay, for an Epic, there could be many, many features in there, and it helps us to manage and groom that product backlog, because most of the time the backlog is far more than your staff can get to. You cannot get to anything before that. So just kind of FYI, it's just a way to help you groom those things, to say that we'd like to have this someday, maybe never. You know, depends on how much you can get to your backlogs. Then you have a feature. A feature would be something very specific. It could be as much as go add a button onto your web UI, and underneath that button, when you hit edit, well, it's going to go and do certain things. It's going to go update your database. You might need a brand new field. You could need a new view, or you could, if you're in some shops, you might have entity framework underneath there. So there are many different features that you could have in there. And then basically a product backlog, or we call them a PBI, is something that breaks the feature down even more. So if you had, again, an example of that you're going to go do an edit on a website, and the DBA very well may be the one that goes and adds the field. So you would create a product backlog to say add that button, and then underneath that button, you would turn around and say, I want to create a task. Okay, the DBA gets the task to create the field. The developer gets the task to go and add it to the API if that's the way you're programming, and then someone else may get a task to go and actually add the button on the UI for a UI developer. So depending upon how you work, a PBI is kind of high level. Now, the one thing you do want to do, and what makes it really effective, is that when you're looking at tasks, those tasks need to be very short and small things to do. You should be able to do them technically in a day or less. A task should not run into a week-long item. If you have a week-long item that you're trying to complete, that's more the product backlog, and each task you try to accomplish it as quickly as possible. Okay. So some of the process actions that you have, so as you're working with um, Azure DevOps, okay, and you are turning around and working on files, so as you go into Visual Studio, specifically, that's how this is being worked on, and you go change a table and add the field to that table, then what happens is everything you changed, it's going to show you the list of files that you have modified. Now, if you accidentally did it improperly, or you didn't want to really do it, you can always undo the file, but you at least have everything that you've touched that's different than what is in source control. Now, within Git, they use a different terminology, and it took me a while to get used to this. Git actually does pulls and pushes, okay, when you do a sync. So if you want to go retrieve the data from the server, from the web, you would hit a pull. But if you want to turn around and actually push data up that you're through with and get it into Git, then you would do a push. So you would need to do a sync. And the main thing is on syncs, what you need to remember to do is on a daily basis, every time you come in the morning, if you're on the main branch of the software or whatever, you need to sync up with development. You need to sync up and pull everything down that someone has changed. And as we get to talking about branches in a moment, you then will need to also sync and merge to your local branch that you're working on. So And we'll talk more about branches in a moment. So a branch is just a complete stream of software code. And specifically, when I say software code, that means also database code. So when you're looking at a branch, if I am told to add a field or multiple fields to a database and maybe some views and stored procedures, I will go to the development branch and I will go pull off a copy of the development branch as it currently looks, and I will turn around and actually then I will create a new branch that I can work, and it's independent of what's going on and what's being released. And we'll see that more in a moment, and we'll talk more about branches. Now, once you're through with all your work, once you're finished and you're ready to actually check in your code, okay, you will also want to do a pull request. Now, but before you do a pull request, you'll need to merge the whatever's been changing along the lines as it's been happening, as this flow's continuing to move of code changes moving through yours and other people's. Then what you would do is you would first merge your code in, merge the code down from that main development branch, and you would turn around and do, once you do that merge, then you would do a pull request.
So
And
Tom, got a
yes,
question in chat here. What do you think about migrations for releases?
migrations for releases. Um, are they talking about from a migration, like migrating to a newer version of SQL Server, or are they talking about uh, a whole uh, a whole major release being migrated? Maybe they can answer that in just a moment, and we'll see what they come up with.
That works.
So, all right, and then we can explain it. I'll explain what we just did recently. We did kind of a semi-migration, so we'll talk about that in a second here.
App migrations is what Thomas was saying.
What is it now? Sorry.
Application migrations. So building out a roll forward path for your own application as you develop. So instead of having like one-off sets of changes, you have sort of V1 of your app and V2 of your app.
Oh, okay, okay. That doesn't always work real well because, like, when we had the major hotbed of our project that we were in just a couple months ago, we actually had several features going on at the same time. So hold that thought for a moment, because I'm going to come up with a picture in a moment and I'll show you exactly where migrations won't always work, because you need to know, especially when several features going on, maybe that feature is not code complete to ready to go, to versus where you may very well want to maybe they're not going to release it in version 1.0, they're going to release it in version 2.0. And so you've got things moving on you. So hold on, because we are going to get to a picture that's going to show that pretty clearly. So I'll, and then I'll, if that doesn't answer the question, then we'll hit it another way. So anyway, a pull request, going back to that, what a pull request basically is that it is a code review. So your peer, one of your peers is actually going to do a code review on the stuff that you're checking in to make sure it's right. And when we do that, we can't go into the main development branch. We can't check directly into it. It's got to go through a pull request. Someone's got to go in and approve that code and say, yes, it's doing what I think it should be doing. So I'm going to go ahead and approve it to go up to the next level. So now, work items is basically things that have been assigned to you to change. So you'll have, I have normally in my queue, I can have anywhere from 5 to 20 or to 25 in my queue. It seems like my queue never ends. I never can get rid of it. So it's constantly moving, and the prioritization of it might move. So you'll have different sprints and things like that you'll turn around and say, okay, in this sprint, we're going to get item 1, 2, and 3 done. And in the next sprint, we'll get item 4, 5, and 6 done. You know, so, and the prioritization by the time you get to the second sprint could very well change. They very well may say, nope, we're not going to do this one. That one's going to have to wait. So we're going to go do this one first because priorities have changed. So let's talk about branching. Okay, so this is where we really, the meat and potatoes of everything is. So at least in our source control and our Git, we have a master branch. And what the master branch is, it's always the code stream of production only. We'll merge into that release, into the production branch when we release code to production. But unless the code's made it into production, it does not go into the master branch. It's got to go. It's got to already be released into production to end up into that branch. Then the other branch, the next branch is the development and ongoing branch. And what this is basically where this code is technically ready to go to QA. It's technically ready. It could be ready to go to UAT, but it's mainly more ready that it's ready to go to QA. You have finished all of your work. There's nothing else that you need to do. So we'll take that individual PBI, and if there are multiple tasks on that PBI, which there could be, and multiple people are working on it in parallel, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to wait until everybody's done. Then normally within our PBIs, there's also a QA task on that PBI, and when everything is done and said and ready to go, we will actually then merge it up into the development branch, ready to go into the QA area. So some things that happen with the development branches is that release branches upon a code freeze would be pulled off of that branch. So off of development, you're going to turn around and pull a release branch. Okay. Now, as you can see here, when you're doing working code streams, and this just about looked like our code stream a couple months ago. In fact, it was probably worse. You can see that you very well may also have a major development branch, a major feature. Normally, your PBIs are going to even be finished within a sprint. You try to get multiple PBIs within a sprint. But if you can't get them all within one sprint, and you have a major feature that's going to take maybe 4, 5, 6 sprints to do, then what you would end up doing is you might pull off a major feature branch that would eventually roll back in development. So that ongoing development is ready to go, and maybe the major feature branch would be like version 3.0 or 2.5. It's something, okay, we're going to put in this brand new feature functionality into the website, into the database, and it's the same thing from the database perspective. And this branch is not going to go into 2.0, it's going to go into, say, 3.0 or 4.0. So that's where migrating is not necessarily, doing a migration is not necessarily going to work for you, because if you are, if you're moving things in, you might, you could have different branches. Now, a piece of major branch, major work feature there, let's say PBI 6 gets done early, and it's something that doesn't necessarily have to wait on the major branch to go, but it could go ahead and go. You could do what's called a cherry pick, okay? And you could turn around and move that PBI number 6, and you could move it into ongoing development, and now it goes out in version 2.0 instead of 3.0 or 4.0, wherever that version may work at. So what you have to realize with branching is it can actually move everywhere. It can move all over the place and stuff. So so you have to realize that things, at least in our environment, they're very mobile. And Kevin, are you still there?
I am. I'm still awake.
Okay, good. I was just making sure I had a phone call come through, and I was making sure I didn't get disconnected there. So, okay, thank you. So at least in our environment, things were very, very fluid. Things were moving all over the place. Okay, we're going to go ahead and release this one in 1.0. This one's going to go in 2.0. This one's going to go in 3.0. So as you work each PBI, the PBI is meant to be feature complete, okay, when you're working with it. So a PBI is normally not going to be, unless it's going to be basically that the major feature complete could be also multiple PBIs. So it takes multiple different ones. And the purpose of this is to allow many different people to work on the project. At a high, a couple months ago, we had about 35 different developers working on the project. So we were basically moving things in and out, and based upon timing and all, it was basically, okay, this one's not going to make it in the major when we release the software, so this needs to be pulled out, and this will be part of 2.0 or whatever the case may be. So this is what this branching and merging, which from a database perspective, you and I, we've never done this before. Developers are quite used to this, but from a database perspective, we're not used to this at all, of the code branches and stuff. And the interesting thing about at least Visual Studio and Database Project is that if I go and release a previous version of the database, it will roll back code. And if you tell it, it will go and allow it to do it. It will go delete data. So you got to be very careful in what you're doing there. So and then you get to a point that you're going to turn around and cut a release branch. You're going to turn around and say, okay, this is candidate release number 1. This is beta release number 1. And you're going to merge everything in. Now, the problem with that is you've got the ongoing PBIs going on. You've got all that kind of stuff that is happening to you with the PBIs and stuff going on. But all of a sudden, you now have this new branch called release, and it's candidate 1.0, and we don't want to add any more features to that. So at this point, you would very well spin off of the hotfix branch, or off the release branch, you'll spin off this new hotfix branch to fix a code issue that was a bug. Or maybe it's just a hot fix that they saw that needs to go in this particular branch. So you don't always have to spin off the master branch, development branch, or bug branch. It could be, you can spin a branch off of any of these branches and create sub branches, and it can get rather complicated, and ours did. And with Azure DevOps, what it allowed us to do was we had automatic merging going on between all the different branches and stuff. And we had at one point, I think, a high of about 10 different branches going on at one time with different feature functionality. And all of that was being managed to go back to the other branches via automatic merging. That works perfectly until you have a code conflict. And when you have a code conflict, that's where a human being has to step in and do a merge, do a manual merge to resolve the conflict and have conflict resolution. You're going to have some of those, but one of the keys that kept our merge conflicts down was basically you take off as small chunk as you can, and you try to check that code in and out on a daily basis, if it's complete, of course. So we're always trying to move code in and out in a very, very quick basis. You don't want a piece of code, or try not to have a piece of code lingering out there for a week or 2 weeks or whatever. If you can keep it down to a day or two, then you're going to minimize the amount of conflict resolution that you're having. So, Kevin, do we have any more questions on branching while we're here?
Let's see. I will open the floor for all questions. By open the floor, I mean do the same thing that I do all the time, except now I'm going to vamp for the probably 15 to 20 seconds before people actually hear what we're saying. And then it gives them a chance to actually type in questions, which Tom can provide outstanding answers for.
Now, while we're waiting for the questions, the Houston did record the use of Visual Studio, so you can actually see how it's used and stuff. So database project, and then they also put in, they did a video also of this particular presentation in Houston. So here's some references that if you've never set up CI/CD, here's a way to set up CI, and you can also CD. I think they've upgraded it, so we would have to go look at it. And of course, I did talk about Azure Dev Studio with SQL Data Partners. That was before you, Kevin.
It was. It
So
was before I took over as Grand Carlos.
yeah. So anyway, so let's get into Azure DevOps and kind of look at Azure DevOps and see what we have here. So you'll notice that there is, we were talking about the repos, the files, the commit, the pushes, the branches and stuff. So here, if I hit this down arrow, and just interrupt me when someone comes in, Kevin, and we can do that. I created a bug off of the branch and turned around and looked at it. So you got the development branch, which is, here's the master, which is in production, what's went to production, and here's what's ongoing changing on a continual basis. So you can always change over to the bug, and you can then go in here and you can see what was committed. You can see some removing, adding some indexes. Here's some stuff that I tried to do that looks like the status failed when I did the CD. You can also look at any pushes of code that have been put up. So one of the nice things about this is, and I may have one of my teammates on here, I was telling him about this, is that when you complete a pull request, you can also search by who the pull request was done by. So here you're only, because this is my test bed, play bed, basically you can turn around and only find me, but at work I can find a whole list of people and I can go look and see, okay, what pull request has he put in? And then when I look at the pull request, I can actually go in here. And the nice thing about a pull request, I can actually see the code change that had happened on the table. So when I'm reviewing the code of someone else, you can actually see that there is a field request here on the table, and it actually shows you the change that was made. So to see it, and which makes it very easy. You can also view the whole entire script if you want to look at the entire script. But that's one of the beauties of having the pull requests. You can also do tags if you want to do tags. We've done those. In this particular area, I haven't added a ton of branches. I've only added one. But if I wanted to go to the development branch and I wanted to go add a brand new branch here, let's see if I can get down to branches here. Okay, and we're going to say we're going to create a new branch. And off this branch, I'm going to create it off of the development branch. I'm not going to create it off of the master branch. And we could just say this is going to be a feature. And we'll just call it PBI 123 make new button. Okay. And then you could turn around and you could create it. And when it creates it, it actually pulls whatever was on your machine and makes sure and adds in a brand new branch. And that's why it's very important before you actually create a branch off of the development branch is to do a pull and a from the website and get your latest code. You can also do that via Visual Studio. The way you do that is through the team area. Now let's see if it's got it right down here. You would go in here and do a new branch. You could see that it's there. Let's see if it, Kevin, we're going to find out right now if this thing actually turned around and connected to my Azure DevOps like I asked it to.
My fingers are
So,
currently crossed.
so we're doing a poll to get the current code. It says it's already updated, that there's no changes to it. And then what you can do here is then I can create a new branch also. Now you're like going, Tom, where's that branch you just created on the website? And because I just did a pull, I should be able to go to the remote feature, and there's my new button branch that I have right there. And if I click on that, double click on that, you see it checking out the code. And then at the very bottom down there, now I'm on that feature branch. So I can now go into the code base, and I can go in here and basically change a table. And I can say for the company table, I want to add a new field. And we're just going to call this Kevin's field. Just because I want to, Kevin. You're the option tonight.
That is totally reasonable.
And I'm going to make it nullable. Okay. Now, once I've done that, notice the pencil down here, the pencil all of a sudden highlighted. I'm going to save the change. And then what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to go into the change request. And remember, I told you it will show you that you made the change. Now, the nice part about it is if you don't remember what you did a day later or 2 days later, or you drop it and you have to come back to it, you can come back into compare unmodified results, and you can see the change that you actually made. And I don't know whether I have any history on this, but you can also see, let's see how much history I have on the file. I don't really have that much. I added the table. You can see way back in 2018, and then I turned around and made a change last year, added some files in and stuff. So I could go back to the copy on 8/21, and I could pull it back and start using it as the branch, the one I want. So that's the beauty of it, is you can go look at, if you have an issue, you can go look at it and say, Kevin, you made this change, what did you do? And you can go look and see exactly what he did. So that's the beauty of using source control, branching, and all that kind of stuff. So once I get through with this change, I can turn around and say, added new field. And hopefully you are putting the comment in. We're required to. Okay. And then we would actually commit it. Now, once we commit it here, the one thing you need to remember is that it's only on my machine. It is not up yet up to the cloud. So we're going to go ahead and sync it up to the cloud.
So while it's syncing, you mentioned that it's required for your team. Is that a team norm, or is there a setting in Azure DevOps that forces that?
There's a setting in Azure DevOps that forces it. So you can have it on or off, depending upon what your team wants to be. We basically have it turned on for everybody within that's touching source control. So we make them put comments in. If you don't, it won't let you go in. The other thing we also have, the setting is you can, per branch, you can turn around and say, Kevin, basically that you can check into that branch or not check into that branch. So back, like I was saying for a moment ago, and I'm going ahead and push this code up here, and it's now up on the website. But if I go, for example, in our shop, basically no one can check into the development branch without a PR. So basically, that's the only way to get the code up. So again, it's a setting within Azure DevOps that you're basically saying, I don't think I know I don't have it set up locally on my personal trial copy. The other thing to be aware of with Azure DevOps, if you've never played around with Azure DevOps, unless they've changed it, 1 to 5 users is absolutely free. So go up there and set yourself up an account and go up there and play with it. Go up there and just create you a deal. And I don't know if I've ever told you, Kevin, basically all my demos and all my databases stuff are now in Azure DevOps. So whenever I want to go to do a new demo, I basically will destroy my SQL Saturday database, and then I'll just republish it and
That makes
put
it
it
pretty
onto
easy.
the server. Yeah. So, and then I'm starting afresh, brand new. So, you know, I basically have now gotten rid of all my demos and all that. Anything I might have changed during that presentation is gone, you know, unless I wanted to save it and stuff. So it makes it really, really nice. So if you are a presenter, I would highly recommend that you go do that. So go make that change. So let's go see if that change made it up into the table. Let's go into this branch. Notice that it changed it up here, okay? So if we go look at it and go look at the table, we were in SQL Saturday database, we were looking at the tables, and it was, come here, where is my, Kevin, I almost forgot where I put that. I did forget where I put that, SQL Saturday DB, and that was in company, that should be. Let me do a poll here also, now that we've, oh, I haven't merged it in. So now the next thing we do once we, let's go ahead and just kind of finish up what we were doing. So let's go back to make a new button, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. So once you get through with the code, the next thing you would do is you would do a pull, a PR. So for some reason, there's my pull request. So you're not connected to the repository. So it's going to yell about me now. So let's go over, and maybe why it's not showing the code up into the website too. I had a hard time getting Azure DevOps to connect up to the deal. So let's see, it got that. So let's go do a PR on this branch. Okay, let's create a new PR. I'm gonna go into the development branch and new field. And then you can type out even more information if you want to. The other thing you can do is go and say who's the reviewer going to be, and I'm the only one on the system, so it's there. We do actually require ourselves work items or PBIs or tasks to be put in here, so we won't let it go through, but I don't have that requirement, so I'm gonna go ahead and hit create. Now, if it checked in, oh, looky there, we've got conflicts. So it wants me to go resolve these conflicts. It won't let me go and actually put this data into the system yet. So, and you can see where some changes were made earlier and stuff. So let's go resolve some conflicts. Okay, one way you would resolve a conflict is you would turn around and merge down. Okay, so we should have the latest there. So let's go into branches. Okay. And in the branch, we're going to merge. We're going to merge from development down into my branch. And it's saying it's already up to date. It must be a previous item. I'm not getting any merge conflicts here, but normally what you would do when you get this merge conflict, you have to come back into Azure DevOps, and you would have to turn around and make the change in Azure DevOps. It's where you would have to make the change, but it's not going to let you continue until those two items are addressed, and you can see the files that basically that it's bringing in here. So if I try to approve, it should end up yelling. It's not going to complete it. It won't put it in the CD lines, because you can see it won't complete it and put it into CI/CD until these two items are resolved. So any questions there about that?
Let me rile up chat and see if I can shake some questions out of them.
While you're checking that, Kevin, the other thing is the PRs, the bugs, the tasks, etc. You can see several different things here that I've added over a period of time. And you can turn around and add a new work item, assign it to yourself, assign it to someone else, or you can just create it and not even assign it to anyone and let it just be in the product backlog. Because as you're looking at these items in here, you can see that there's an iteration of which iteration and which item you want. And you can see that it says new, so I haven't put it down into that I'm committed or approved to start working on it. And you can basically put what state, you can define this state within Azure DevOps.
So, question here, is any of this functionality specific to Azure DevOps? Would it be roughly the same in Visual Studio? What is special about Azure DevOps?
Okay, so it's what Azure DevOps is giving you, they really work hand in hand. Let me say that. Visual Studio and Azure DevOps really works hand in hand, and they are together. So what it basically boils down to is you're making code changes, but when you're making code changes, when you check it in here, you're putting it into Git, you're putting it into Azure DevOps, okay? So if you're using Azure DevOps as the tool to basically allow you to go in and work on objects and stuff. And the nice thing about this is when you're working on objects and tasks and stuff like that, is that it gives you the ability to say how much time is left on the project, so you can get burned down charts. You can get things like capital expenditures on things that your company can turn around and work on and stuff. So it really is all encompassing, because the real beauty of this is when you are actually done with the PBI or whatever, you're done with the release, you can then have a CI/CD chain set up, which we do. So when we're finished with a particular item and I check it in, it goes into a build process first to turn around and say, yep, I can turn around, build this. There's no errors in the code. And then that CI part of it, it goes in and actually puts it up as a message into our Slack. And then once that puts a message up into our Slack, then the approval process, one of our QA people or certain other team leads can actually approve the code to go on into a QA environment. And that's a specific QA environment, or it is it can be also into a UAT environment or production or wherever. It's got to always, in our branching, it's our environment deployment, it always has to go to a QA environment before it can go to a UAT environment. And same thing before it can go to prod. So what this is building up to is where you've got the database project is building you up to all of a sudden you're doing branching, you're checking code in and out, you're doing things like that. The next progression is that now all of a sudden you're doing continuous integration, and then you can eventually get to continuous deployment, which we're gradually working toward, where you might have a feature complete, it's been tested, and it'll just go right on into production with the appropriate approvals, of course.
Excellent. The short version that I would give is that if you're familiar with old Team Foundation Server or Visual Source Safe, that's the kind of stuff that you get in Azure DevOps. It's source control, but then you get you get the additional things like work items and deployment, all of the stuff that Tom is talking about. Visual Studio just has a really nice interface into the features with Azure DevOps.
Good point. And the other things you have is you can see down here, this is Azure DevOps here. You do have the ability to even create test plans, load testing, running them, so it is so feature rich, and it's getting more and more feature rich by the day.
So,
Note, about a year and a half ago, Kevin, remember this when Microsoft did not have this anywhere but the San Antonio data center, and it went down for a day?
yes, yes, I did.
I think they have fixed that problem
They have.
because everybody was very mad at them because we were basically down one day. Unless you can remember what you were working on, we were down for a day because we couldn't go pick up any new tasks or anything because Azure DevOps was offline. But I can say roughly that's after working on it for about 2 years now. That's the only time I've ever noticed that it went down. It's always been up otherwise.
Yeah, I haven't noticed any problems other than that day.
Yeah.
So next question. How do you normally handle the output package? Say that there was something that was generated that would not run correctly due to, for example, recreating a large table, and maybe it was only caught in the staging environment, that it got through dev and QA just fine.
Well, that is back to, if you remember right, that when we did, and if I could back up for a moment, okay, so we're in the release pattern here. We basically have cut our release. We're ready to go. We're in a pre-release branch. And what would happen would be is if we didn't find it till the very end, then we would actually create a new branch off the release branch, hot fix it, and then put it right back in there. And you got to remember that this will flow back. It always flows back into the other branches. It's flowing backwards into until it gets to development branch. The only one that doesn't go to master is until it actually gets all the way to production. Hopefully that answered their question.
Yeah, so let me follow up with my own version of it. Uh, so you have this action, and it's obvious that there was a failure. Do you just check in back into the same branch? Do you try to create another side branch, then merge them together? What would you do?
We actually create off the branch that's got an issue. We'll create a new branch. We'll fix it in that branch, test it, and make sure it's good, and then we'll merge back into the original branch, overriding the file that was bad.
Okay, so for example, you're working on feature ticket 1000, and we had that deployment into staging, uh, and then we found out, hey, staging failed. So you would create bug fix 1001 off of
Correct.
feature 1000. Okay,
Yep.
that's a little interesting. My philosophy has been work on it in the same branch and push until everything works okay. But it also works.
The reason we do that is what if when you're working with that, you create another issue? Not meaning to, but you created another issue with that branch. You could end up with a never-ending cycle there. So you can kind of, so we always pulled another branch. The way we do is we pull another branch to fix it, hot fix it in, or whatever the case may be.
Okay. Um, so let's see. Clarification on the output package question. The error isn't no so much that the code was done incorrectly. It was that the uh, deployment may have been the generated deployment may not have been done correctly. So would you ever try to change the deployment artifacts?
Well, the deployment artifacts is always what is in. So if we go back to the website for a moment and look at that particular pull request that we were looking at, any of them really would work. If we go look at the pull request, and let's just say that we are going in, and when we're doing that, we basically go in here and we see what the code change is here. What you would actually do is you would then go again, fix the code, create a new branch and fix the code that's causing the issue, because the deployment, if this was just say release 1.0, is only going to be this table that's going to go. It's a delta. It's not a, and I don't think I said that yet, it's a delta. It's not a, it doesn't deploy the entire database for you. It's only deploying what's changed and what you've told it to change via, because you could go into and create your own post-deployment or pre-deployment scripts also to do things that you might need to data.
Yeah, and this kind of leads me into a thing that I've experienced with database projects, something that has made me a little hesitant about using them for larger databases, and that is that I may make a change that I know I could do a near zero downtime and with pretty small effect on the end user. And then what ends up happening is that the database script will basically create a new table, move all the data over, possibly block for an extended amount of time, and cause, I'll call it deployment annoyances. It's not quite deployment havoc because, it runs, but maybe it takes 6 hours to load a table when I know, wait, SQL Server 2012 allowed you to do that as a metadata operation. So why are you loading all the data into a separate table and recreating all the constraints and everything?
And I've seen that, Kevin. I've actually seen that. So how many of us have basically that developer, database developer, whatever that is, anal, and says, I want this field in the table to be in, instead of being at the end of the table, I want to put it in the middle. Have you ever had that, Kevin? Have someone that, that instead of adding new fields at the very bottom, they add it in the middle?
Oh, I'm that type of person usually, and you're right.
I
That's
can,
going to require a table rebuild because you can't simply add it in the middle.
there's actually a new flag that I can get around you and it would automatically put it at the bottom and
Really?
not do the table rebuild. Yes, really. I, I can I can get around you. So,
For
and I
now.
do. I've got that flag set in my published profiles so that nobody can do that. Nobody can do that. Now, with that said, what if, Kevin, you turned around and made a field go from nullable to not null? You're going to have to rebuild that table.
Yeah, that's going to be a schema modification lock and a full scan
Yeah.
of the table.
Yeah. So something like that, Azure DevOps will go in and do it. In fact, if you do something like that, if you go from a nullable field to a not nullable field, the very first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to put in a pre-deployment script that's going to basically populate everything and make sure you have no nulls before you can actually make that field not null. So there are those are the only things now in our deployments that I actually see to where it's rebuilding the table as a whole. It's when we're making something crazy like that. Another one, that I've seen is basically if I change the encryption methodology, I might have to rebuild the table. But that it doesn't do very nicely. But I've gotten most of those table rebuilds down to a minimum. So,
Okay.
because I got people like Kevin that wants to put this field in the middle, and I go, check box, put it at the bottom. So, so yeah, Yeah, that was one of the biggest complaints, by the way, of Azure DevOps, and they finally added that flag so that we can get around you. So, and not do a table rebuild. So I agree with you. I agree with you. But you can definitely see it in the other thing you can do is you can definitely see it in when you're doing a publish of the database, which is what actually pushes the code somewhere. You can actually do a generate first, and you can look and see what it's going to do in that environment. And that's the nice thing to remember is what it's going to do in that environment. Because if you've already released the code once, you have to remember that it's only deltas that's going to show you on that environment. So if you've got a release that's saying taking 6 weeks to do, and you're releasing on the last day, it's not for QA1. It's only going to show you what you last changed. Now, when you go to production and or UAT and you point it to UAT and say what changed, you're going to have far more stuff in there, especially when you go to production. Then you'll have the entire list of everything that's different between the two environments.
Excellent.
Other questions?
No other questions at the moment.
All right. Well, I because I don't have people in front of me, I'm not able to expound more upon this. I think I pretty much have covered the branching and merging. It can get crazy. Don't get me wrong. In fact, when we're doing branching and merging and got to where it was at the height of our program, it was worse than what you see on this chart. Of the different branches that were going on. There were so many moving around. So you have to be really careful. And the main thing is, I would tell you that if you're doing a lot of branching and merging, the beautiful thing about Azure DevOps is you can go in the background of Azure DevOps and you've got someone that really understands the system well. You can have auto merges going into those branches that once you check it in to say the development branch or a higher level branch, it can move it back to the development branch for you without you touching the code, just as long as there's no conflicts, resolution conflicts, as you saw a while ago. That won't let me check it in. So, but anyway, if no more questions, I think that is it for tonight.
All right. In that case, thank you very much, Tom. Assume that there is a significant amount of virtual applause, which is just like real applause except distributed.
Right. All right.
So with that, we're gonna call it a night, everybody. So thank you. You got some claps in the audience, so there you go.
Cool.
So thanks everybody for showing up. Our next meeting will be next week. We're going to have Alicia Moniz talking about something. Actually, I need to get the abstract tonight, but that will be at our data science group. That's going to go up on Meetup hopefully tonight or tomorrow night. Oh, one last question. Can you point to any Git host, meaning a local Git installation or GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, etc., etc.?
Not that I'm aware of. When the way that you can really know is go get yourself a free subscription to Azure DevOps. And when you're setting it up, it will tell you what it wants to point to. And when I set mine up, there was only two choices, Git or TFS.
Okay,
I
yeah,
didn't,
so that's the style. You can actually point to others. Got somebody in chat, and actually my case as well, using Bitbucket.
okay.
So yes, it is possible. You can tie to GitHub. Tom, I'm sure has your company's probably doing a self-hosted Git repo, or are you?
No, we're totally up in Azure DevOps.
Okay, all right. So Azure DevOps is hosting your Git repo. All right.
Yep, yep.
So yes, there are different options. Uh,
Good
you
to know.
you point to, if I remember right, you just point to the URL and there's just a common API exchange. All right, so with that, stay tuned for next week's presentation. In the meantime, everybody have a great evening.
All right. Talk to you guys later.